Hey everyone, welcome to another conversation on the Voice of the Marketeer, wherever you're watching or listening to this from. My guest today joins us all the way from Bangalore and is a dynamic leader at the forefront of marketing and entrepreneurship. Meet Roshan, the VP of Marketing at Vymo, where he drives branding, demand generation, and customer engagement globally. Previously, as co founder and CEO of Wolf Labs, Roshan's led over easily 100 digital transformation projects and has had quite a journey from bootstrapping the venture to pivoting towards product development. He's also popularly known today for his podcast, The Startup Operator, a platform where he amplifies insights and conversations within the Indian startup ecosystem. With nearly 15 years of overall experience spanning sales, product, and marketing roles, Roshan's relentless curiosity in the face of everything is possibly his biggest strength. Roshan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you so much, Nandita. Thank you for having me on your podcast. Very generous and kind introduction for sure. My mother will be very happy about it.
So, on that happy note, Roshan, you've had quite the career so far, and I'm sure there's plenty more to come. In this journey. But first, I'd really love to trace back a bit and dig into how things really evolved for you and where you are today. I remember reading one of your LinkedIn posts, which kind of piqued my curiosity. I think the title of the post was something like "The 5 Jobs I've Had and What They've Taught Me." And so, picking just one of those jobs, which is really top of mind for me, Wolf Labs, tell me how you really plunged into entrepreneurship and walk me through some of your learnings through that whole phase.
Wow. So this is going to be a walk back in memory lane for me. Look, Wolf just happened very coincidentally, almost accidentally for me, right? I mean, there was no deliberate plan as such to start up really. So 2008, I started working for a startup. Thought I'll stay for a couple of months or so and move on, but ended up staying about 4 years. Did a bunch of things across sales, product, marketing. And when I came out of the startup, right, I mean, I was what you would call a generalist, right? But then, it wasn't really recognized as a role or a function at that point of time, right? So people would ask me if I had 4 years of sales experience, which obviously I did not just sales. 4 years of marketing, again, I didn't have 4 years of marketing or 4 years of product or whatever, right? So I had to kind of invent a job for myself. And so, I mean, I started consulting with a few companies. And so on, and pretty soon I had 3 or 4 people working with me, and then that turned into the company, right? So no deliberate plan whatsoever, went into it very naively, and really just wanted a job that I liked, I loved, and sort of invented it. I mean, that's how Wolf kind of happened. So initially we started out as a marketing firm, worked with a bunch of startups and small businesses. The idea was to sort of introduce the digital realm to these folks. I mean, I know it sounds really redundant and arcane right now, but believe me, this was 2011, 2012. Digital, while the potential of digital was acknowledged, but it wasn't really clear how things will pan out, right? I mean, for most of these businesses. But yeah, we helped them adopt digital, and then at some point of time, we had one too many crazy ideas over drinks, and then we said, we should do our own thing, right? I mean, we care about things, right? We should definitely translate some of our ideas to products, and that's how the product pivot happened. So we built what you could call a Slack for families back in the day, right? And it was interesting. Of course, severely underestimated what it took to build and scale a consumer internet startup way back when, right? And yeah, folded up in 2016, 2017, I should say. Joined Vymo, and I've been a SaaS guy for about 7 years after that. So yeah, that cliche of consumer internet founders swearing off uh, swearing off everything they know to pivot to SaaS for a more predictable life is absolutely true.
That's very interesting, and I'm sure there was a ton of fun as well. I mean, 4 years can really fly by when you're doing a lot of stuff. But it seems like you had a great time as well. Tell me, Roshan, moving from Wolf Labs and then also starting the startup operator, where you've actually now hosted some of the biggest names in the industry, some people that I follow ardently and really, really respect for their work. What are some themes that have surfaced for you time and again with all of these experiences, and how have these themes kind of shaped the way you think today and operate as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was a very optimistic person 4 years back before the podcast, but the podcast has turned me into like an eternal optimist of sorts, right? I mean, because I meet these people who are just doing the most fantastic work, going up against insurmountable odds and trying to make it, right? And it is really, really inspiring, right? So these conversations have have really uplifted me in some sense, right? I mean, before the podcast, I also had this cliched view of a founder, right? I mean, that, this is either the garage startup, right? I mean, just out of college, trying to tinker and solve things for themselves, or it's this person who has spent 10, 15, 20 years in a domain and has decided to like move out and do something of their own, right? But one thing I've realized after about 400 episodes is that founders come in all varieties, right? So you have the college kid cliche as well. I've hosted, for instance, Kaushik of Ethereal, right? And he has been tinkering for about 10 or 12 years, right after college. Or Abhinav of Orangewood, another robotics startup, right? And again, he hasn't held a what you would call a proper job and has been, executing on startup ideas ever since he graduated, right? You have those kind of founders. You also have very experienced founders like Ranjit, for example, of Stell Labs, right? I mean, now this guy spent about 20 years in corporate, various roles, like in Wipro. He was heading the IoT at Wipro, and then stepped out to build dairy automation and solve it in a full stack way, right? And these founders can come from anywhere, from Bangalore, from Coimbatore, Surat, uh, um, anywhere really, right? And there's really no dearth of problems to solve in India, right? I mean, so that's been one experience that has really surprised me, right? The diversity of the founder profiles, where they come from, what they're doing, etc. So that for sure, right? And I think also the kind of startups that I talk to, right? I mean, these are folks who are still early in their journey. So I don't have the likes of Deepinder of Zomato or like Bhavesh of Ola and so on. I mean, I would love to host them at some point of time, but most of the folks that I talk to are maybe 3 or 4 years into their journey, right? They're perhaps a little over their seed or have just raised their series A and so on. And I still see that unfinished product, I mean, that clumsiness, which you don't get to see in some of the larger startups, right? I mean, there's a sort of a veneer of like invincibility that, some of these, scaled startups have, right? And because I get to see that up close, I also tend to understand how hard it is. Like, it's so insanely hard, right? I mean, however hard you think this is, I mean, it's harder than that, 10x harder than that. And every startup goes through some kind of a near death at least once or twice in their journey, right? At least every 5-10 years, I think there's 1 or 2 times that this happens, really. And these are instances that really test a founder's commitment. And talking to some of these folks, I kind of realized, right, that man, I mean, if I were to start up, I mean, would I be as perseverant as some of these folks, right, and see through the odds? So that's the second thing I would say, right? The sheer amount of effort and energy it takes to like do this entrepreneurship thing. And the third is, interestingly enough, right? I mean, about 85 to 90% of the startups I've hosted on the podcast are not doing the first thing that they set out to do, right? Which is that they went into the market with a hypothesis, realized that things are slightly different, and iterated and got to something which has got like a more compelling pull, right? So really, at the end of the day, it's about the team, really. Yes, the market is super important. Yes, the problem is super important. But if you have the right set of folks with you, especially your first initial hires, you can sort of iterate and get to a point where you're successful, right? So these are three things that kind of stand out from the many interactions I've had with the founders on the podcast, right? Yeah.
That's it's I first of all, I couldn't have said it better. I think some of the learnings that you summarized are so applicable to anything you do today as a leader, especially in the marketing space. And that's kind of what I wanted to also talk about next. You've had a beautiful marketing journey at Vymo. I mean, you've really worked your way up the ladder, and today as a VP, I'm sure you handle a lot of teams. There's a ton of stakeholder management and such. But tell me, if you were starting over today as a marketing leader, what are some of the things that you would not do in your first, 30, 60, 90 days? Because there's so much that's written and talked about, things that you should do. You should get cracking in week 1 and week 4 and so on and so forth. But in your opinion, just looking outside in today, what are some of those things that you would not absolutely do in those first 100 days?
See, the first thing that you have to realize is that the founder is the default CMO, right? Until the time you have a CMO, so you got to respect that fact, right? And it's simply a fact. I mean, you can't think that you will go and educate this person about marketing and how marketing is so wonderful and so on and so forth, right? That's the first thing. I think align your plans and objectives with the founder. You folks have to be on the same page almost instantly, right? The moment you start working itself, there should be no ambiguity, no misalignment between what your objective is and how you're going to get it, right? You don't have to go through all of the details and those last mile things that you need to do, but broadly you have to have alignment, right? I mean, 85-90% alignment for sure, right? And you have to earn their trust. I mean, you can't go in there and sort of like dictate terms that, hey, I'm a marketing person, I know this stuff, and here is how it's supposed to work, right? I mean, so that's the first thing. And because I've had all of these conversations with the founders as well, right? I mean, I've tend to become a lot more empathetic from the founder's perspective, right? In terms of just the kind of stuff that they're dealing with and so on, right? So having more of a founder centric approach here really helps, have a macro view of the business and so on. Now, the second thing is something that you mentioned in your question itself, right? Which is a lot of the times, I mean, you feel like you will figure things out, right? But you kind of have to have a milestone based approach, right? And you have to make it as quantitative as possible. Yes, there is not enough data. Yes, the moment you start executing, you'll realize things are different. And yes, maybe like 40-50% of the plan will change, so on and so forth, right? But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a plan. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have a 30-60-90, right? One of the things that's really helped me when I hire people is to make absolutely certain what our 30-60-90 goals are, right? I mean, in fact, the first day the person joins, I mean, I calendar these catch ups right away. So there is absolutely no ambiguity in terms of what we're moving towards, right? So that's the second thing. The third, I think, is also important, which is um, you can't import a playbook. You can have principles, you can have systems, maybe certain ways of thinking, that is totally fine. But you have to deal with things on its own merit. I mean, you have to go and understand the business, you have to understand the market, the product, the customers, and so on and so forth, right? You have to invest in that. So you can't be like on day one, hey, here's how it's worked before, and this is all of the things that I need to do, right? So I would say, your risk taking in terms of your investments and so on and so forth have to be a lot more calibrated, right? So be humble enough to recognize that, maybe things are different, right? And that you will have to learn the context before you really, are sure about what to do.
And maybe just double tapping on the leadership side of the work that you do with Vymo today, Roshan. You obviously have a team of your own, and one glance at your LinkedIn, it seems like you are passionate about the people side of the business,
Right.
internally and externally. Tell me, what are some of the skills that you look for when you are putting a team together, specifically in marketing today? And I'm not just talking about the hard slash technical skills, but really looking at a package. What are some non-negotiables for you in putting that A team together?
See, I can teach anything to anyone. The only thing I can't teach is hunger and drive and ambition to do better, right? I've seen that, across maybe 100 people that I've hired and I've worked with, right? That is one quality you just cannot teach. We've hired interns at Vymo who've spent 5 years, have led massive projects, have led teams, and have gone on to do wonderful things here. And if you were to ask me, like the time I hired them or even a year after that, if they would be totally capable of doing the kind of stuff that they're doing right now, I mean, I would absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have a damn clue. They've gone on to surprise me. So much. I mean, even now, right? I mean, after 5 years of working with some of these folks, they still surprise me with how much ingenuity there is, how perseverant they are, and just how committed they are. I mean, it's a fabulous feeling, actually, right? So I feel like that is the biggest driver, and it's not just at junior levels or whatever, right? I mean, even at very senior levels, right? And especially at senior levels, because you have certain baggage, right, from having achieved a bunch of stuff in your career, right? You have to look at that, right? I mean, is the person looking to do something more, right? Do they have that kida, as they call it, right? I mean, that is really important. That's something that you can't teach, really. And also, it's a very point in time kind of thing, right? I mean, it varies. I don't know if I'll have it 5 or 10 years down the line. I don't know how circumstances would be that time, right? So I think that is the single biggest determinant, I would say. Other than that, I think the usual things, right? I mean, one is that a fallacy that managers and leaders tend to make tend to have, and a mistake that we make is expecting people to be awesome at everything, right? I mean, people are people, man. I mean, they're going to have like pros and cons. They're going to have things they like, things they absolutely detest. As long as the things they're bad at is not like hurting their aggregate performance as such, you really have to over index on the things they're good at, right? And which is why you have a team, right? I mean, you balance out skills, you balance out intrinsics, and so on, right? um, a lot of management and leadership philosophy right now, I think, is applied and trying to teach a fish how to climb a tree, right? Which is absolutely redundant. I think you should just over index on what people are really, really, really good at, right? And that's where the alpha is, if you ask me, right? Um, and yeah, again, managers and leaders tend to over index on process and systems and catch ups and so on and so forth, and not so much on vibe. Okay. Building that culture, building a culture of excellence, right, within a team, is just amazing, right? I mean, it's you can't put a system and a process to all of the decisions that someone has to take, right? Or all the work that someone has to do. And really, I mean, if you can codify things to such an extent, why do you need a person, right? I mean, you can really automate things, right? So I mean, building that culture and that vibe where a lot of the implicit decisions, let's say 90% or 95% of those implicit decisions, are made in the way that you would expect it. I think that is another investment that people have to make, really. I mean, as managers and leaders, just sticking to that, right? I mean, that is super, super important.
And now, say 7 years, roughly 7 years in SaaS marketing. Is that about right?
Almost 7, yeah.
Yeah. So 7 years now, Roshan. What is it like? Speaking of drive and that spirit, what is it that actually gets you up every morning and say to yourself, "Yes, I want to do this."
There are always hard problems to solve, man. I mean, I've always sort of liked solving hard problems in certain domains, right? I mean, it's not like I can't bring myself to like run a marathon or a half marathon. I mean, I somehow feel like it's pointless, right? Especially running on the treadmill. But Yeah, I mean, there are some problems sometimes in some of these domains that really are appeal to me, right? And marketing is one such thing. uh, I am always infinitely curious about what we could do better and how we could solve things. And the thing that you realize is that every 6 months to a year you kind of have to reinvent yourself. I mean, even though it's been 7 years at Vymo, I mean, I am, the kind of stuff that I do now is very different from what I was doing a year before this, right? That's just the nature of your job as such, right? So I think being excited about problems and not being too hung up about the specifics of your work as such is really important, right? Because the problems will change. The specifics of your work will have to change. The people you work with might change, the market will change, so on and so forth, right? I mean, so it's important to be excited about problems. And look, I mean, it's not something that all of us are naturally born with, right? I mean, in fact, the natural impulse is comfort and convenience, right? It's something that you have to trick your brain into sort of liking, right? And maybe like pipe a dopamine reward or something of that sort at the end of it, right? I mean, but it is quite addictive the moment you solve, like, higher order problems, more complex, more challenging problems. I mean, you have a certain sense of achievement, right? And that is really the kick that I get in really, coming, waking up another day, and then trying to do the kind of stuff that we do.
And on the thought of just solving problems and solving challenges, I know you've done this whole 0 to 1 journey several times in your career, especially in the past decade. Tell me, Roshan, how do you approach the idea of actually showing commercial outcomes to the leadership team or the executive committee, especially when there is a reduced investment in marketing, which is actually happening a lot at the moment, especially with early stage startups and early stage companies. How do you go about it, or how have you done it in the past?
I've always found it useful to sort of index to some kind of revenue metrics, right? Whether that is pipeline or leads or meetings or demos or whatever it is, right? Have a revenue metric as something of an objective, something that you are going to shoot for, and you're going to be relatively all right, I would say, right? Because look, a lot of the brand investments and so on have to follow the demand gen efforts, right? I mean, you have to move the needle on that front for you to gain perspective on what it will take to really have greater inbound or close more deals and so on and so forth, which is essentially what a brand outcome would be like, right? I mean, to be the preferred vendor or preferred product for a certain category, right? Or even in some cases build a need, build a category as well, right? So I think it's very, very important, especially if you're joining a new startup, to kind of solve something that is super important for the founder, right? And really earn the right to get a buy-in for all of the brand investments you're going to make, right? On day zero, I mean, if you're going to preach brand psychology and Kotler and this and that to someone, I mean, they're not going to have the time of day to sort of sit through all of that stuff, right? Because you think what you're doing is important, but you have to kind of weight it with the overall company objectives as such, right? I mean, so with that, I think you have to pace and lead, right? You have to pace yourself with what the objectives, near term objectives are, and then you have to slowly figure a way to ramp on brand, right? I mean, so even with us at Vymo, I mean, the early days were all about pipeline, right? I mean, even now a significant amount of time mine personally goes into ensuring that we build predictable pipeline. But at a certain point of our journey, I mean, we hit an inflection where who we are became more important than what we do, right? And that was impacting the kind of competition we had, that was impacting our time to close, that was impacting our conversions on opportunities to closure, so on and so forth, right? And that is where we started like slowly ramping up brand investments as well. And these were not some mega investments in terms of billboards and newspaper ads and all of that stuff, right? I mean, we've done a bit of all of that, but more or less the consistency in terms of messaging, amplifying this messaging, most relevant channels, so on and so forth, right? I know a lot of my peers, at least some of them believe that, you can be brand first, right? You can start building a brand on day one. Maybe you can, right? But I'm a little old fashioned that way. I do feel that, your first 0 to 1 is going to be more sales led, more demand led than really brand led, right? I mean, especially in B2B SaaS. But yeah, I mean, I would love to understand case studies of folks who've done this really well, right? Where they focus on brand building from day zero, right? So recognize also that it's a time of the journey, right? I mean, at a certain time in the journey, brand will become really really relevant, and that is when you have to like focus on it.
Right. And maybe just looking back at your marketing career specifically, Roshan, what what do you think has been the most significant investment that you've made in your marketing career, whether it was time, money, energy, what have you?
It's an interesting question, right? I mean, see, look, I had this massive imposter syndrome when I first stepped into marketing full time, right? Because I had done a bit of marketing, but nowhere close to the kind of marketing that I was expected to do, right? So um I mean, so I consumed everything, right? I went and read up all of the case studies possible. I went and read up all the blogs possible. I spoke to other marketing leaders, uh, right? I mean, as many people as possible, and I have a close network of about 8 or 10 folks who I talk to pretty regularly, right? And that has really helped, because sure, you should have a first principles approach and so on, but there are some things that you have to learn, right? And learn from others experience, right? I mean, um, you can't make every kind of mistake yourself, right? And having a close network of people around you has I mean, around me, has really really helped. I think that's the single biggest advantage that I have, right? Which is that I have these 8 or 10 folks who I can ping, and they're all perhaps one cycle or two cycles ahead of me, so they've kind of seen some of this stuff. So I know, for instance, what I need to do for 0 to 1 in the US. I know, for instance, when I have to hive off an ops team. I know, for instance, if I'm going to this large event in the US, who I should talk to, so on and so forth, right? Now, from the strategic to the tactical, it really helps to have like a close network of people who you can just jam with, right? I mean, it's really really helpful.
And since you mentioned, working with global clients or global projects, obviously you do a fair bit of that at Vymo, right? What I'm curious about is what are some great things that the Indian startup and the Indian ecosystem is doing in terms of marketing that you think, you know, the Western societies can actually pick up from, or the Western startups and founders and marketing leaders can pick from?
um See, I mean, I'm going to have a slightly different sort of a perspective on this, right? I mean, one thing we have done extremely well over the last 20-25 years is that we've learned how to build products, right? So we started, let's say, I mean, if you trace it back to the IT services side, doing a lot of this back end work and so on and so forth. I mean, we've finally gotten to a point where we can build a truly world class product, right? I mean, if you look at any of these products that we have right now, whether it is Vymo or Freshworks or ChargeBee or any of these things, right? I mean, they look and feel like a truly world class product, right? And you look at the reviews on G2 or anywhere else, right? I mean, there is we're absolutely topping the charts, right? I mean, in terms of product experience and so on, right? And that's been a difficult journey, I would say, right? And that's had a superb impact on the business. I think this next journey, right, for us, I think the 5-10 years from now, we will actually learn to sell and market. Okay. And COVID was kind of an inflection point, right? I mean, it helped that we could hop on a Zoom call and sell to someone in Texas or New York or wherever, right? But I feel like we're still lagging on that brand and marketing stuff, right? I mean, if you look at the kind of brands that are built in the US versus some of our own folks, right? I mean, even culturally, right, we're a very understated people. We're not those folks who are like overly ambitious, overly like loud and confident as such, right? I mean, that is really changing, especially when I talk to the younger generation of founders or marketers. They don't have the baggage that I have, right? I mean, or my generation has. So I think it's a work in progress, I would say, right? And even within marketing, right? I mean, we really cracked all of the SEO, the paid marketing, all of that kind of stuff, right? I mean, I think if you look at any of these SEO blogs or what have you, I mean, it's all a bunch of Indian folks who are like, giving you hacks and do this, do that, 4 ways to do something else, and so on, right? I mean, it's all of us, right? And some of the best acquisition marketers also that I see, right? I mean, paid acquisition folks are all Indians, right? And I think that is something that we've done phenomenally well, right? But we are yet to produce someone like a Dave Gerhardt, for example, right? Or someone like even someone like a Dharmesh of HubSpot, right? We're yet to produce folks like that who are natural marketers who can like tie the macro with the very tactical stuff, and who can create categories and so on and so forth. We're yet to do that in the realm of B2B SaaS, right? And I think, I mean, I'm positive about it. I think we're a work in progress at this point of time. Another 5 or 10 years, give or take, I think we should probably have our own folks like that. Yeah.
And are there like some trends or developments on the horizon for both for the Indian startup scene, but also the wider marketing space that you are particularly excited about?
See, it's going to be an interesting time right now, I mean, because the markets have, been up, down, sideways for, the last 3 or 4 years, right? And looking at the macro situation in terms of like the war and the inflation and elections and whatnot, I mean, it's going to be, let's call it ambiguous or unpredictable for the year to 18 months at least, right? I mean, that's a reasonable point of view to have, right? So a lot of the products are going to come into all kinds of pressures, right? I mean, pricing pressure, growth pressure, and whatnot, profitability, and so on and so forth, right? In fact, Jason Lemkin had a post out recently where he compared some of the SaaS stalwarts, right, their growth in 2021 versus now. While they were growing at an average of 67% then, these companies are growing at about 23% now, right? I mean, these are like the platinum class of startups, right? So in this sort of a macro environment, right? I mean, marketers really have to overextend their job descriptions, right? I mean, they have to go above and beyond to figure how to make the product more valuable, right? So that you can insulate your product from as much pricing pressure as possible. Try to hold on um, to whatever you can, right? Basically on that front, you really have to sweat those leads and opportunities a lot more to make sure more things are closing, right? You really have to do more with less in terms of marketing budgets and whatnot. My own marketing budget has been flat, or in fact, I mean, has depressed quite a bit over the last 2 or 3 years, right? Whereas, I mean, the kind of objectives we take on has only increased progressively every year, right? So I think these are things that we as marketers have to figure out how to do, right? Because I keep coming back to that point that, look, marketing is important to you, right? But is it important to the founder, to the startup? That is something that's you have to earn that right? You can't just go in with that perspective.
And on the note of doing more with less, tell me, amidst all the stuff that you're doing today, how are you actually prioritizing your own sort of professional development slash growth? I mean, what are you teaching yourself at the moment, or do you have any plan for upskilling yourself in marketing over the coming months?
And I learn from different pursuits that I have in life. I mean, I didn't go to B school. I haven't really got a degree in marketing. So everything that I've learned has been experiential, right? I mean, I pick on an interesting problem to solve. I learn everything about that, who has done what, and then execute, iterate, and then learn, right? I mean, that's been my approach for everything. Uh, so really constantly thinking about these things has helped a great deal. I mean, I guess it's also an intrinsic with me that I can't really switch off. Right, I mean, I'm constantly thinking about things, and I get ideas at the most unlikeliest times, right? I mean, so I guess, be open to more of a work life integration than a work life balance, right? Because I think the kind of lives that all of us are leading, I mean, we're so connected that you can't really say that, I'm going to work 9 to 6 or 9 to 7, and then, not do anything after that, right? I mean, because sometimes you're in the gym and you get this fantastic idea, right? I mean, like, put that down on a audio note or write it down, etc., right? I mean, this kind of thing routinely happens with me. The other thing is that just having an interest in diverse topics, right, and diverse subjects, and having all these various activities, it helps a great deal, right? I mean, whether it is jujitsu or music or economics or policy, or even just like hanging out with your family, extended family, or whatever, right? I mean, I think having that kind of a well-rounded life will give you a lot of ideas that can kind of make your marketing a lot better. I mean, people might think it's something strange or whatever, but you're not going to be like the generation before us, or maybe the generation just before them, that you studied to be an accountant or a marketer, and you were an accountant or a marketer for 30 years until you retired, had a pension, and then so on, right? I mean, it's not going to be that kind of a life, right? So you're going to have a second, third, nth career, right? I mean, so yeah, I mean, you need to have these sort of diverse interests and pursuits, I feel. um, and just do great work, I mean, like, give it your all. One thing that's really helped me is speaking about the kind of work that I do and writing about it, right? Because I feel like the podcast, for example, amplifies everything that you do. And everyone should have a podcast, right? I mean, like in this case, I mean, Voice of the Marketer is fantastic. I've seen a bunch of your episodes, and I mean, this is again obviously adding to your arsenal of skills as well, right? And also is putting you out there as somewhat of an expert in the stuff that you do, right? So I think those are things that I strive for. But I would say, don't just be constrained by what conventional learning is, right? I mean, there's a lot of learning outside of all of that as well.
I loved how you said that. I think for me, something that has worked phenomenally well is just learning on the job, whatever the job might be, the project or initiative or the role. I think that has been the easiest way for me to really absorb the skill that I wanted to build at that point in time.
Just on that note, right? I mean, see, look, again, I mean, if you hark back to the old times, right? I mean, this whole notion of apprenticeship, right? I mean, is very underrated today. I mean, everything that I learned was by virtue of being around really smart people and absorbing everything they did in their life, really. I mean, I was not a particularly bright fellow, I think, right? But I was just really lucky, and also, I mean, I just wanted to be something more, right? That I hung around with these people and kind of learned it. And that's how I learn things now as well, right? I mean, so I will regularly hang out with my peers who are really good at X or Y things, and it kind of tends to rub off on you, right? I mean, at least you know what the standard of excellence is and what is expected, right? That you can sort of pursue that.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, my benchmark of excellence has just radically been pushed every time I work closely with a group of founders, the CEO. Even in my current role, I work very closely with the board of directors, and I think it's those kind of interactions and experiences that really have molded me over time. But speaking of time, I we have come down to the time I had in mind, Roshan. But before I let
Sure.
you go, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, this was a fun conversation. Thank you again for hosting me. And folks, if you want to check out more of the stuff that I do, I'm Roshan Cariappa on Twitter and LinkedIn, where I'm most active. So I'd love for you guys to reach out to me. And yeah, I'd love to exchange thoughts.